This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
Welcome aboard, Frightseers. Looking for a little holiday fun? You've come to the right place. We specialize in all sorts of package tours.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz. Gil will join us shortly. Before we set sail, please, if there's a way for you to physically like what we're doing, jumping up and down is great, but hitting a like button is even better. Then please do it. It makes a huge difference. Better yet, hit the subscribe button. I'm not kidding. There's stuff going on that it would be criminal to let you miss it. And that includes a great new TV show that Gil and I are taking out to the TV marketplace virtually as we speak. It's called Are You Afraid? And it's a tasty, streaming horror black comedy about flesh-eating ghouls who live in an eat-or-be-eaten world that looks suspiciously and terrifyingly like our own.
Flesh-eating ghouls. For a long time, we humans have been deeply afraid of vampires and zombies.
Sin for paramedics.
Fair enough, vampires and zombies are scary. But neither vampires nor zombies
Are real.
Flesh-eating ghouls, on the other hand, are real. They've been living in our shadow for thousands of years, hunting us, feasting on us, treating us
Like food.
But some ghouls are tired of living in the shadow of their food. Those ghouls have decided it's time to leave the shadow.
And put us in our place where we belong.
On the menu,
It's an eat or be eaten world.
Flavored by fear, filled with the monster we should have been afraid of all along.
Flesh-eating ghoul.
Are you afraid?
Better be.
Coming soon.
when we finished shooting Bordello of Blood, we still owed HBO one more season of Tales from the Crypt. And for reasons that we'll discuss in the episode, we took that season to London. Now, being in London was great fun. Traveling and living on someone else's dime is always great fun. But we were TV strangers in a strange TV land. The first lesson we learned the hard way: we both may speak the same language, but we don't necessarily mean the same things when we speak it. It wasn't a coincidence that not long after we returned from England, before Bordello of Blood even came out, that everything flew to pieces. Gil and I broke up our creative partnership and friendship in utter ruins. Good thing we already know there's a happy ending to it all. So with that in mind, get ready for some great stories about our time in what my old pal, the Crypt Keeper, would have called scary old England. Our guests today, Crypt's amazing production designer, Greg Melton, who also PD'd The Walking Dead, and our then assistant, Ed Tapia, who these days is a phenomenal producer in his own right. At no point did anyone sit in a room and say, hey, you know, the series has gotten a little tired. How might we freshen it up? I know, let's take it out of town someplace. London, perhaps. No such conversation ever happened. That's not why we went to London. We went to London for the same reason that we went to Vancouver to make Bordello of Blood, which was to the IA. That's my memory. Do I have this right? Gil, do you remember it that way?
Not exactly. I mean, that was one part of it, but I do remember a conversation actually with Joel, where I brought it up and he was like, UK, you want to go? Get out of here, London. He blew it off. And then I said, well, but, you know, look at the talent we'd have access to and look at the directors we'd have access to. Little did I know it'd bite me in the butt. But we did have that conversation. And I think it was appealing to, on some level, to HBO.
But let me come at it this way. Chicken, egg. Was the motivating factor to change where we made the show or to leave LA?
I think a little of both. I think a little of both. I think the fact that the Teamsters were not being very helpful had a great deal to do with it. However, you know,
it was in the air. I mean, that idea was in the air. So if a good idea got floated, it would gain, it would get traction. And at the end of the day, hey, it's a great idea. If we could figure out a way to pull it off.
Well, we did figure out a way to pull it off with the gentlemen that are our guests today.
At Tales, Ed Tapia was Gil's assistant. In the interim, he's become a very successful TV producer himself. Greg Melton was our production designer. He's still one of the best in the business. He designed the look for Walking Dead. When you and I took over Tales from the Crypt, we instituted a system of how we were going to get this show done on time, on budget. The previous people who were running Tales from the Crypt, Bill Teitler, it was a little more loosey-goosey. People seemed to have their own. If you wanted to bring in your own DP, you could bring in your own DP. It was not disciplined in any way, shape, or form, and that's why they ended up $1 million in the hole at the end of the second season. So we had a terrific system, which was, I think, your innovation, Gil. We had what, 2 ADs and 2 cinematographers.
Yeah.
And the point of the exercise was
to alternate so that we never stopped. We would continue shooting. While one group was shooting, the other group was prepping.
right. Every director, you had 5 days to prep and 5 days to shoot, and there were no exceptions.
And the only person this was inconsiderate of, besides you and me, Alan and Ed, was the production designer who's here with us today, Greg Melton,
Indeed.
who really didn't get any days off because the world changed every 5 days.
Right.
And I use Greg's
Ed tape.
experience on Tales still to this day, because whenever I have showrunners that talk about, we have to go to these places and these places, I say, just build me a box. Build me a 20 by 20 foot box on stage. That 1 week will be a doctor's office. The next week it'll be a hotel room. The next week it'll be a therapist's office.
Mm-hmm.
Next it'll be a coach's office. And that little model that Greg had, because I remember we were shooting in one while he had a construction and set deck team completely redoing the other stage, and we would just go back and forth between the two sets. And to this day, I'm amazed that he was able to transform sets within 3 or 4 days into something completely different.
Well,
And
I
the audience
remember,
thought we were on locations.
remember we were running night crews. That was really the key.
Greg Melton.
We'd finish shooting something, at 1 a.m. and the set at 9 a.m. was gone. And
Yeah.
or it was already being turned over. So it was quite a it was quite a run.
We had a formula. It was basically 3 days in, 2 days out.
Right.
A rough formula. Not every episode went that way, but that was the general design, so that if it was 5 days in, 5 days in, 5 days in, you'd have no time to do anything.
There was a lot of that though, Alan, where we stayed 5 days.
Yeah.
What I remember that was always the genius that I never quite figured out how he pulled off was that, I figured he would either redress or repaint, and then we would relight. But I never really thought that geography was going to change all that much in terms of what the physical layout would be. And yet I would come in and Greg would bring me in and say, so what do you think of this? And I go,
Right.
Wait a minute. How did you take the hospital room and make it into the palace?
Right.
It doesn't look like a hospital room that was made into a palace. It doesn't look anything like the hospital room. In fact, if you said to me, where was the patient lying? I don't think I could tell you, because it doesn't look anything like the hospital room.
Right.
I was
I
the
remember
genius.
there'd be new walls. Yeah, there'd be new walls or walls missing, and it'd be a completely different configuration. And I
Yeah,
remember coming in, it's like, wait a minute, yesterday it was something completely different.
right.
I remember episodes, Greg, where situations would change on us, and we would be forced to put you into a terrible bind. I remember the situation, the episode with Joan Chen and was it Ernie Hudson?
Ernie Hudson.
Yeah. Where we had to fire the director. We met at Gil's house on a Sunday to talk about how the hell we were going to do it. Rodman Flender stepped in to direct, and we did it was a carnival.
We were like 3 days out, and you guys said we need a 1930s rolling carnival on the stage.
Right.
I remember that one really well. That was one of the
that was one of the okay. So that was one where we kind of but circumstances, circumstances.
Yeah.
You zig.
Well, it
you
was
zag.
always fun, because being that anthology, what you're in the Caribbean this week, and next week you're in a Pacific logging camp. I remember that kind of
Yeah.
stuff going on, like, I mean, just massive
Right.
turnarounds. And you know, a plantation house doesn't lend itself to anything in a Pacific logging camp, you know, so you're,
Strangely, no.
yeah. So there's some of those, you know, where sometimes you got lucky and sometimes it's like, it's a strike, you know?
You know, I don't know that we ever looked at the script and thought in terms of, boy, that one's going to be a hard on Greg. Let's not do that one next. Let's do this one next. I don't know that we, you know, when the scripts were ready, that's when they went into the hopper. And
Yeah, we didn't have the luxury of choosing between A, B, or C script.
no,
We were just always chasing it.
Yeah. So, all right. But at the end of the day, after, all right, at the end of season 6, at the end of 3 seasons that we had done together, we had a modus operandi. We kind of knew how to do this. I don't know that we could do it in our sleep, but pretty close to it. Our intention as we crossed the pond was to do what we did in LA in London. Yeah, as close as we possibly could. And the reason to bring Greg over was to have Greg kind of teach. We were going to get an English crew and a design team that was going to basically take over for you, right? Wasn't that what ultimately happened?
Yeah.
But you know, we needed to teach them our method so that they could replicate the madness.
Yes.
And they had their own madness because they never really could replicate.
Right. Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. You know. All right. So we arrived with the best of intentions.
Before we get there, Alan, I remember we spent a lot of time prepping in Los Angeles before we actually got there. I remember working on the budget with Stu Burton of all people and Gil, you know, trying to figure out what it would actually cost us. While we were editing something, it was we had the offices near Warner Brothers, some editing suites.
We were editing Bordello of Blood.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I mean, that was the other gigantic complicating factor. In addition to trying to do our show in a foreign place, with a little bit of, you know, misguided to a degree, you know, but you know, and at the same time we were trying to cut a feature film that was problematic in its own way.
Right.
By the time we got to season 7, I think we had done all the good comics. You know, there were only so many comics. Our obligation really was to just to use the titles, and if there's anything in the story that lent itself, you know, okay. But you know, we had now, God, we had what, 50 some odd episodes under our collective belts. 30, yeah, about 40 episodes under our collective belts. We had done this. I think all the different variations that you could possibly do, I think we'd done them already. The comics that we had left to choose from were the ones at the bottom of the barrel. They were comics that we had avoided for seasons upon seasons because we just didn't like them. But now that's all that was left. And so we entered with one problem with, you know, the material that we were starting with was not the best. We were coming into this after Bordello of Blood had beaten the shit out of us. And so I don't think we were creatively feeling, I don't think we had our A game in us after Bordello, you know, after the Bordello experience. Aside from Scott's episodes, I can't think of any, nothing was exceptional. I'm trying to remember, did we even write an episode that season, Gil? I think we co-wrote one with Coleman, which was basically a way to get Coleman to write, you know, the first draft so that we could just, you know, fill in, because, you know, we were trying to produce a show in a strange land. You were cutting a feature film.
Right.
We really didn't have time to write. And
not only were we cutting the feature film, but we were cutting the feature film in Los Angeles.
Yeah, right.
We were prepping and shooting in England.
Right.
And if you guys remember, I was spending 3 weeks in England and then 3 weeks in LA.
Right.
And 3 weeks in England and 3 weeks in LA.
Yeah.
And getting more and more fatigued and just really exhausted. But we kept going.
But I think by the time the show hit London, I think we were creatively fatigued on the show. which happens all the time. We were I think hitting burnout creatively. I don't think we were giving it our we were showing up and doing what we did every day, but I think we had spent all the creative spark. That was just my feeling.
I also think that the Indian takeout food had something to do with that.
Well,
That's only my opinion. That's only my opinion.
All right. But doing the show in London, that by itself was very, very exciting. The one person who I wish could be here as part of this conversation, but cannot, is Scott Nimmerfro.
Rest in peace, Scott.
We never from season 3, 4, 5, 6, we never had a staff. It was just me, and Scott would write a bunch of episodes. And when we went to London, one of the things that one of the benefits that we were allowed to have for the first time ever a writing staff, which was Scott. And so Scott traveled with us, and Scott was responsible for rewriting a lot of the episodes and overseeing his as he always did. And Scott's insights would have been tremendous. Scott had tremendous adventures there, simply because he was so well connected. Before, in addition to writing for Tales from the Crypt, before he became our story editor, he was the head of development for Dick Donner's company. And so he knew everybody, and he knew how to play the game. And so we send Ed on ahead to go looking for, we needed spaces to live in. We had one or two leads on studio space when you left Los Angeles. Yes, Ed?
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the unsung hero for us, or at least for me, was Roy Button, who at the time was at Warner Brothers, because he was my guru. I mean, every time I had an issue, I would call Roy, and he would give me 3 or 4 names, and I'd follow up. And wherever he is, he made it possible. I mean, he was a great help to us.
Roy Button was a friend of the court from the get-go, even before he went to England. I don't know how I met him or knew him, but anytime I had a question about something I didn't understand or know that would affect the UK, I would call Roy or send him an email. I get an email right back with the right answer.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah.
How did you know Roy Button? How does he fit into this?
He was either a Warner Brothers or an HBO executive that was his home base was not Shepperton, the other one, the big studio. Pinewood. Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't remember whether it was part of the HBO Warner Brothers family in some way. I don't remember exactly what his title was, but I think
he was one of the people in charge of Warner Brothers UK.
Right. Yes. Something like that. Yeah.
And they were stationed in Pinewood, and he couldn't do enough for us. I mean, any problem I had or we had, and we would call him, and he had an answer.
Yeah. He opened a lot of doors for us, literally and figuratively. Yeah.
Aside from Ealing, where else were we looking for studio space?
We looked at Pinewood, and Roy said, "Nah, you don't want to come here. It's too much going on, too big. You don't really need it." We were looking at a little stage space in Hammersmith, but the stages were too small, and Shepperton, of course, because we had a relationship with Shepperton. But ultimately, Ealing, when they said we could take it over at that price, we were like, "Yeah, that's the place for us to go."
To most people, the words Ealing Studios probably don't mean much. But if you love movies, if you make movies, the words Ealing Studios, they're magic. Studio spaces are haunted by the creativity that happened within them. You walk onto the older sound stages at Universal or Warner Brothers or MGM, now Sony, and you can feel it. It's weird. London has been almost as important to the history of movies as LA. The studios in London are as legendary. Shepperton, Twickenham, Pinewood, Ealing. Ealing is named after the part of London where it sits. The studio, or some version of it, has been in business since 1907 when amateur movie maker Will Barker bought 2 properties facing Ealing Green and started making movies there. The movie business being fickle, the studio changed hands pretty much regularly until the BBC bought it in 1955 and began leasing out the stages. For 40 years, everything imaginable got imagined there, including Tales from the Crypt. Like I said, a studio is kind of haunted by the creativity that goes on inside it. Ealing is haunted by the great comedies Alec Guinness made there, The Lavender Hill Mob, The Lady Killers, The Man in the White Suit, Kind Hearts and Coronets. They made parts of Star Wars here. They made Monty Python here. And when you're there working at EALING Studios, damned if you don't think about it. A lot. It kind of haunts you. You found a great apartment for...
I found a great apartment for all of you.
Ed Tapia.
You guys landed and you had like 4 or 5 choices.
Oh, yeah.
Greg ended up in that great Muse apartment. Scott loved his place. He had a place in Chelsea.
Where were you,
Gil, I
Greg?
remember.
I was in on Brompton there in Chelsea.
Yeah.
Gil Adler.
I could look out my window out down the street and actually see your apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys were close. Yeah. And Scott had a cool little like carriage house on a cobblestone road, and he absolutely loved his place as well.
We were in Knightsbridge,
Yeah.
2.5 blocks from Harrods. The guy who had built this apartment was in the plumbing business, and at the time, plumbing not only was food problematic in London, plumbing is weird. The hot and the cold. What the heck? Come on, guys, what the hell is that? But this had American style plumbing, and it had an incredible shower, a steam shower. It was amazing, just amazing. And because it was near Harrods, it was literally 2.5 blocks from it was in Knightsbridge, 2.5 blocks from Harrods. When Helen was in country, my wife, my English wife, Harrods became our commissary. The food halls at Harrods.
Well, I lived on the other side. Alan, I lived on the other side of Harrods, and my English wife also loved the fact that we were only 2 blocks away from Harrods. In fact, I learned to really be happy that we were only 2 blocks away from Harrods as well.
Indeed. It was incredibly advantageous. We all got to live in a great place. London is a wonderful place to call home. It's a wonderful place to work. It was a real joy living there.
Yeah, I was the only one that didn't go into central London. I stayed in Ealing, you remember. I was 7 blocks from the studio. Yeah. And I would joke with Lisa that I was in my flat while she was still waiting for her taxi cab.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be close by.
But you've always been a very practical person.
Yeah.
You are incredibly practical. We were there in the winter.
I got there the 3rd week in October, and I left the 1st week of April. I was there 6 months, and the one thing I'll never forget is that the sun came out 3 days in January.
That was it?
Well, that goes way back to ancient times when they first called it United Kingdom. Before they had that title for the country, they were going to call it 3 days in the winter you get sun. Yeah. They decided not to do that.
Some of the things that I remember the most is just it would be dark when we came to work and it'd be dark when we left.
Yeah, that's true.
And the way those offices were set up at Ealing, we were below ground. We just had that little tiny window, and it felt sometimes like, I only saw the sun on Saturdays and Sundays.
Right.
We had a lot of problems setting up. It was just hard to understand the differences in the work ethic. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, just culturally, they look at it very differently.
Talk about that. All right.
Well, I mean, for example, I remember just like the 1st or 2nd week you guys are there, we tried to order food from this one specific restaurant, and our poor PA came back and just said, they just said none of it comes that way. Because we tried to order no lettuce on this, extra this, and they were like, no, we just rather not make it. We're just not going to do it. Do you remember that, Gil? They came back. And said, we can't have lunch. We can't have lunch because they won't make it without cheese.
That's why the greasy Indian takeout became very popular.
Yeah.
The very first time that you and Gil went out to set and saw the craft services table, and it was just like literally tea and a couple of biscuits.
Well, we've talked about that when among the first people that we hired was Malcolm Christopher to be our production manager. Malcolm came with a pedigree. He had done an English-American co-production. I forget the name of it, but he had worked with us in the past and seemed to understand how to speak to us and relate to us.
And he was recommended by HBO.
Yeah.
Covington Cross was the show that Malcolm had done. All right, so Malcolm, I remember we were having. He had said, "All right, so when the lads come in the morning, we'll give them tea, of course, but with the biscuits, if you put out the tins, the lads will take more than one." So he was suggesting not to hand them a biscuit when they came and leave it at that, and never put the tin out because they might eat more than one. This was a radically different way of thinking of a craft services table. For reference's sake, our idea of a craft services table was not Joel's idea of a craft services table. He referred to our table as gum and water.
Do you remember the choices for breakfast on the truck? There wasn't a choice.
It wasn't.
It wasn't a choice.
Beans, a banger, and some sliced tomatoes.
Yes.
And that was it. There was no like a breakfast burrito. There was,
Oh gosh.
they just, it was like prison.
You know what? And that, again, that wasn't unique to the show, because the very first time I went to London, we stayed at a B&B, and first morning up, we go down for the breakfast, and the lad says, "Egg and bacon?" We're like, "Sure, sounds good." Had the egg, had the bacon. Next day, he comes down, says, "Egg and bacon?" I'm like, "Okay, yeah, sure." Third day, "Egg and bacon?" It's like, "You got anything else?" "We got bacon and eggs." It was
They used to have spam on the menu, but that's gone now.
Once we went to full breakfast, we saved a lot of money on the biscuits in the tins.
Yeah, we had a strange relationship with Malcolm, and then Malcolm, as we tried to get him to understand how we were going to do the show, I don't know that Malcolm ever quite grasped it. I
don't think he ever wanted to grasp it. I think that was the problem, more so than him grasping it. I think he just was, entrenched in the way he did things, and that was the way it was going to happen, period. That wasn't working for us.
Yeah.
No, we bumped into another difference the first day of construction. Now, you and I, Gil, were used to walking out onto the set, whatever warehouse space that we worked. In Los Angeles, our construction crew, your crews would show up in their pickup trucks, Greg. And, in the back of their pickups are lots and lots of tools that we're paying box rentals for.
I think I know what's coming, Alan.
Our expectation is, since we were doing the same show, just in a different place, that the English construction crew would show up, get out of their pickup trucks, reach into the tools in the back of their pickup trucks, and head into the stage to start working. But of course, that's not what happened. There, the construction crew got off the tube with nothing in their hands, and they walk onto the stage looking for, "Hey, we're here to work. Where are the tools?" Now, the way that we understood, the way that we suddenly grasped that this was happening was there was a lack of sound. There was a sound that that was missing. You, Gil.
Oh yeah. Well, I had a conversation, I think with the production manager,
With Malcolm.
Malcolm, and I said, "Where's the first wall? Can't they put one wall up, two walls up?" And he said, "Well, they'll get to it." And I said, "Well, why isn't it up already?" And he said, "Well, they got to get their hammers, and they got to get the penny nails, and then they got to, And I said, "No, don't. Where are the Makitas?" And he was looking at me and he said, "What? The Makitas? Makita? Am I saying it wrong? I think it's, it's like a staple gun. Bang, 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 bang. The wall's up." And he looked at me and he went, "There's no such thing as bang, bang, bang here. We take the penny nails and we bang, bang, bang them into the wood."
When you came into my office and told Glenn and I that story, you actually drew it out. You're like, "They're out there and they're doing this."
Yeah, I did. I can't believe you remember that. So
oh my God. Yeah.
And when I talked to Malcolm, I was going like this: "A Makita, bang, 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 bang. It's a staple gun. Bang, bang, bang." And he was looking at me like I was crazy.
it was crazy for us to be building sets like that anyway. I mean, that's not how TV shows operated. In most other TV shows, they used a system called speed rail to build their sets.
Yeah.
So we were off into some bizarre territory that was taking too long, and there was no way that we could keep to our normal pattern of construction versus locations. We were completely overtaxing our ability to build sets, weren't we?
I don't remember it being that drastic, at least when I was there. What the learning curve there was that they don't throw away anything. So you end up, like, if I wanted to build, like, I remember building the hotel room for Elizabeth McGovern episode. We had some weird, and we had to get a lot of walls that were already built. So it's a very different process where, like, if you needed, an Elizabethan room, you could go and rent it and they deliver it and they just put it up. But we never threw away anything. They never threw away a set. Like here, we just fill dumpsters and take them to the thing. That never happened there. They would stretch, burlap, they call it hessian, on the walls and plaster it and then just take it off and reuse the wall. So it was a whole new way of building sets for my end of it, what I remember.
And it didn't allow us the speed that we were normally doing in the States, right?
No, there was nowhere near as fast.
Right.
No.
And we didn't have a night crew working, did we?
No.
The culture shock was just so different because it's and it's not a bad thing. It's just it's a different work ethic completely. It's about just making enough to get you back to your family and friends and enjoying your weekend, enjoying your life, spending more time with your kids. And it's not this this American thing that we have where you have to work 14, 16 hours every single day.
Yeah.
And it was in some ways it's very cool to see. In other ways, it was frustrating for us because we thought there was some more efficiencies that we could take advantage of.
Well, that's why they make so many there's so many projects over there. I mean, all the big movies are over there. The big TV series are over there. It's,
In the commissary there, everyone had lunch. There was also a pub on site.
Yeah, it was all connected.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, what our crew expected. I think it was the same way in Canada too. Was that, hey, you could go to lunch and you'd have a beer. You can go back to work. It's not a question. And, of course, for us, this was completely outside of our way of thinking in every way, shape, or form. And so it created a bit of a problem for us because Malcolm, he figured he could never hire a crew that would not be allowed to drink at lunch. But, we didn't want we just didn't want that. And so we cut a deal, didn't we?
Yeah. Yeah, we rewrote the deal memo to say, where it used to say no smoking or drinking, no drinking or doing drugs. It's like no doing drugs, but you can go to the canteen on the property to have one beer at lunch. I mean, literally, it said that.
You were not happy about that, Gil.
I was not happy about that at all. But, we learned.
At the end of the day, our crew had bigger problems than just a beer at lunch. They had the food buses when we were dealing with location.
In actual fact, thinking it through now, I think we should have had them have a minimum of 3 beers before they came back.
Now he says, drink more, boys.
But so much of it, Alan, was just that it was so different. I mean, just the stage itself, if you remember, the stages were built before there were big trucks. So we had everything was, remember, Greg, everything was like a 2-ton or a 3-ton.
Oh, yeah.
Get a 5-ton in there.
Tiny little trucks.
Yeah. And this, what they called, their warehouses, their stores, they had to be accessed by basically minivans moving over to a larger truck. I mean, we couldn't even have a regular stake bed. Those were too big. I remember they were all like mini trucks. And I remember thinking, what are they going to do if they need like a 20-foot ladder on location? There's no truck that can take it.
In the morning, we had to have I think it was a 10 or a 15-minute tea break. And then in the afternoon, it was also a 10 or 15-minute tea break.
Yeah.
Where the tea cart would come out. It wasn't there all the time, but it would just come out for the break. You'd have a cup of tea, have a biscuit, and then we'd go back to work.
Just one.
Right. Yeah.
and everything would stop. It
Right.
wasn't like, okay, it's here. If you have a, go get your tea, but we're going to continue shooting. No, life stopped.
No French
Never-
hours.
And I remember we were close to the first day of shooting and we were behind, Greg. You remember? And Dominic went out and polled the crew if they wanted to work overtime, and it had to be unanimous.
Right.
You
And
know?
they said no.
Yeah, yeah. Several times they did say no.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same problem that we bumped into in Canada in a way. They don't live to work. They work to live. They have a healthier attitude, it turns out.
Yeah.
Once we got up and running at Ealing, the executive offices needed to have some help. We needed an assistant. And we ended up hiring this kid. He was 17, 18 at the time. How old was Glenn?
He had just turned 18.
Glenn had just turned 18. He was
Just turned 18.
he grew up in Hertfordshire, I think.
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, Welland Garden City.
His dad, big in the printing business.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
The Queen.
A good printing company that actually did work for both the Sultan of Brunei and the Queen.
Yeah. So he came from a really interesting place. He was a film fanatic,
Mhm.
and he was so much. There was nothing quite like him, and so we hired Glenn to be our all-purpose, the executive office assistant. One of the first things that we wanted to do was to get some coffee for our coffee machine. And so we sent young Glenn out into Ealing proper, down onto the Ealing High Street, the main road. And there was a Whittards coffee shop. We said, Glenn, go buy some coffee beans for us. And he looked at us like a dog that doesn't understand. Like, what? He said, beans? So we said, yeah, you're going to go and you'll they'll have different kinds of beans, and you'll get. And he still was stuck. Beans? He said, yeah, coffee beans. He said, what? Coffee comes from beans? And he
Very good, Alan. That was very good.
he had grown up thinking that coffee it was an instant beverage that came from a jar. You put some into a cup, poured some hot water onto it, boom, there's your coffee. And so we educated Glenn. It was the first thing I think we taught him about the world outside the little Hertfordshire bubble that he'd grown up in, that coffee indeed came from beans.
I want to just relay one story as to how we actually ended up with Glenn, because we had hired an assistant before him. And if you remember, when we got to the studio, they told us there was Tall Dave, Big Dave, and Glenn. Those were the three that were initially presented to us. And I hired Tall Dave. I remember hiring him because I couldn't meet Glenn. I had met Big Dave, and he already had his position at the studio, but they offered him to us as a PA. And Tall Dave was very excited and said he loved the show. He was able to list characters. But on the first day of work, Tall Dave came up to me at 4 o'clock and said, when do we finish, mate? When do we finish? And I'm like, well, probably 7. He goes, I got band practice at 6. I'm like, oh, wait, what? I said, okay, you can go. And so he went to band practice. The next day, again, about 5 o'clock. Remember this, Gil? He's like, what time are we getting off today? I was like, yeah, probably around 7 o'clock. He goes, I was meeting my mates at the pub. I'm like, do you understand what the job is here? Do you understand what we do? And he's like, yeah, it's okay. It's just, I'll be fine. I'm like, okay. Same thing the next day. It's like, what time are we getting off today? I said, around 7. He goes, I got band practice. Can I leave? I said, yeah, you can leave. Just don't come back tomorrow. And that's how we ended up with Glenn. And I remember when we actually hired him the first day, he goes, oh, I'm so glad you got rid of that wanker. Tall Dave, he's a wanker.
We had access to great locations.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was one of the incredible advantages to being there, in addition to actors.
You don't know how many
being-
times I've bragged to people, like, I got up in the morning and we went on a tech scout to Dover Castle,
Yeah.
stood on top of the keep and stared across the channel and saw, and France is right there.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Right.
yeah.
we're scouting Dover Castle. We're shooting at Dover Castle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it snowed at Dover Castle.
Yes,
it
it
was
did. Yes, it
The whole
did.
thing was incredible.
Dover Castle rises above the white cliffs of Dover, overlooking the English Channel. Built shortly after the Norman invasions of 1066, the castle is featured in lots of English history. Dorney Court was another really cool location that
Didn't we also shoot at Nebworth?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, we shot at Nebworth as well.
Do you remember the hotel in the Russell Mulcahy episode, the circular
yes.
hotel?
Yeah.
Didn't we name it the Adler Hotel?
I think so.
I think so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that was a fantastic location.
But all of those places had something in common. They were all damp and really cold.
Yeah.
I remember at Dorney Court, I mean, that had an amazing history. The house is still owned. The man who owns it was a blood relative of the man who basically built the house. Dorney Court in Buckinghamshire is close to Heathrow Airport. The manor house was built in 1440, but the original Dorney Manor is recorded in the Domesday Book, written in 1086. The house got passed from family to family until 1542, when William Gerard, Lord Mayor of London, bought it. Gerard was an ancestor of the Palmer family that still owns Dorney Court today. Talk about an inheritance. There was a secret little room inside Dorney Court. You remember that room?
I remember a few of them.
Yeah.
There was one where you opened the door and it was a completely internal room. There were no windows. And the room was about 15, 20 degrees colder. And you got it was the creepiest.
Super creepy.
Oh my God, it was.
It chills up your spine, that room. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not making it up.
The attic was unbelievable there because it used to house, like, Cromwell's troops used to live in the top of the attic during the Civil War.
Mhm.
That was amazing house.
And we're making our little TV show there.
Yeah.
There were great locations all around London. It was just hard to get to them because
Yeah.
the moving a film unit around London was not
Brutal.
easy and expensive and time consuming because, big trucks, small streets.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of the times going to these castles made a lot of sense, because we could do everything, the drivers over there the day before and get everything going. So
Yeah.
a lot of times we got out of town because of that.
Yeah, that is what we figured out over the course of, after a couple of episodes, we finally got wise and we stopped building so much and we just started, just more location and a lot less building. It just, and that was ultimately cheaper and faster. And that's what they do. I think they've got every location you could possibly want. And so, why build when you can go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we ended up adapting to them. It's pretty much what we did. We stopped doing it our way and we ended up doing it their way. We got to a point, we realized a couple things. One, that Malcolm had no idea where we were. He had no idea how to solve the problems that we were having. We literally did not know where we were in terms of the money that we had and the money that we were spending. And for us, this was incredibly foreign territory because we were always keenly aware down to the penny where we were, the hot cost would come in and man, that was, we were really moment to moment managing the show so as to stay on time and on budget. And here we were completely at sea. We had no idea. And Malcolm couldn't do anything to fix it. We had to get someone who could seize this by the balls and help us.
How did we
and so we fired.
How did we find Dominic?
After I fired Malcolm, and then his accountant, I think this was a Donner connection. And I think Donner connected us to Malcolm. He said he suggested that we call Dominic. You were cutting in Los Angeles at that particular point,
right?
And so I had lunch with Dominic. Dominic was he was a lovely man, and you just felt immediately he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And I have a recollection, Alan, of you and I, while Gil was gone, talking to the accountant and Lisa Kim together and they gave us a number like 110,000 pounds. We were over in prep. It was some big number for us, and we still hadn't started. Weren't close to started shooting yet, and that's when it became, oh shit, all hands on deck. We got to make a change.
Oh, yeah,
I remember a number like 110,000 pounds.
And no one really could explain why or where that was, and the numbers themselves weren't believable. And so we didn't know who to trust, what to trust. And Malcolm, he couldn't answer the question. So really, he was the organizing principle. He was how we were going to get this done. And if he couldn't do it, then we were completely fucked.
My one recollection of Malcolm is him always saying, "Don't worry, guys, it's gonna be fine. Don't worry, don't worry, it's gonna be okay. Don't worry, it's gonna be okay." And we're like, we're worried. Thank you very much. We're worried.
We're worried. In fact, we're going to have another biscuit. We're so fucking worried. One of the advantages to shooting Crypt in London was it opened the door to actors we could never have had access to before. Dirty little secret, Tales from the Crypt paid for shit. No shit. We paid everyone guild minimum plus 10% to cover the cost of their agents. Not a penny more. No one did Crypt expecting to get rich. They did it because they would get to play parts they might not get to play otherwise. HBO was great to work for. They let us do our work with minimal interference. But like I said, they were cheap. When we were shooting in LA, HBO wouldn't fly in actors based outside of the country. But when we left the country and suddenly had access to all those great actors we couldn't get before, oh, it was wonderful. Bob Hoskins, Natasha Richards, Elizabeth McGovern, Ewan McGregor, Jane Horrocks, Steve Coogan, Imelda Staunton, Eddie Izzard, and future James Bond Daniel Craig. Like I said, wonderful.
We were sort of like the mouse that roared. You know, we came over there, this little TV show, and we just started calling everybody, you know, under the sun and just saying, hey, come on, do the show. Yeah. And some people said no, but many people said yes.
And what one other thing I took away from all of that, Alan, Gil, Greg, is that I was shocked how many times we would reach out to somebody via their managers or agents or publicists even, and then the actual actor would be the one that would call us back. It wouldn't be the manager or the agent. Yeah. It would be the actual actor saying, yeah, I can't do it. I'm sorry. I know the show. I like the show. They'd quote episodes to me just to say they couldn't do it. But it would be them, not any kind of intermediary, which would never happen.
Yeah, that's what happened that's what happened with Roger Moore.
Yeah,
because I didn't speak to him. I spoke to, I think, a manager or an agent. And then 2 days later, you know, Roger Moore's on the phone for you. I'm like, what? Who? I don't know a Roger Moore. Who's that?
Yeah, when Glenn told me that Daniel Day-Lewis was on the phone for me, I hung up. I thought he was taking the piss. Right. You know, I was sure he was messing with me.
We didn't realize when we went there how difficult it was for people to work in England. You know, I remember Roger Moore having a conversation with him on the phone, and when I told him where we were, he said, "Oh no, I'm in Switzerland. You should come to Switzerland and shoot an episode here. I can do that. I can't come to the UK. I can't work in the UK." Got the same reaction from Lewis Gilbert.
Lewis Gilbert, Phil Collins, same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of guys, a lot of talented people who couldn't work for us because of their tax situation.
Right.
Yeah. They said, "Oh, if you go back to LA, I'll come to LA. I'd love to do one in LA." But,
so there were some people that we had dreamed of getting that we could not get. A few that we came close to getting. Anyway, I know you were you had a conversation with Alec Guinness or his people. We tried very hard to get him for an episode.
Yeah, and we almost came. We almost got there. We really almost got there. I don't recall what the problem was ultimately. It might have been scheduled.
I vaguely remember something about his son not being well. For some reason, that's in my head.
That sounds right. That sounds right now that you say it.
Yeah, the other one I remember we almost got was Dame Judi Dench, but she couldn't because of scheduling.
Yeah.
You remember, Gil, she contacted you and actually apologized because she was so busy.
Yeah, yeah.
Damn. She was so lovely. She was so lovely.
We tried very hard to get Mark Knopfler to score an episode.
Yeah.
Couldn't quite get there.
We tried for Daniel Day-Lewis, but he was doing a kids play in Newcastle, which blew me away.
Didn't we talk to Danny Boyle?
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
I still have his cell phone number in my phone.
Yeah,
I think he may have moved. Ed, I think he may have moved since then.
3 or 4 times, probably. Yeah.
we would travel back and forth, and one of the luxuries of our travel was that it was paid for by the company, and it was Virgin first class, and man, that was great. Traveling up front on the Virgin planes, going through the Virgin's lounge at Heathrow Airport was always great fun. That was a thrill. The entertainment system on Virgin had some really cool stuff, and we got turned on to a guy named Steve Coogan who did a character named Alan Partridge, and Scott and I were just obsessed with the Alan Partridge character, and nobody back in America knew who Steve Coogan was at that point, but we insisted we had to hire Steve Coogan. And so, because we were there and nobody argued with us, we got to hire Steve Coogan. For us, that was exciting. Hey, I think we kind of anticipated Steve Coogan being as big as he's gotten. We also saw, who's that guy? He became the most recent James Bond. What was his name again?
Daniel Craig.
Daniel Craig. Yeah. We hired a young guy named Daniel Craig, who did a bit part for us. Freddie Francis directed the Hammer Tales from the Crypt feature film, which is, if you've never seen it, it's funny because it's not even remotely funny, and that's why it's funny. They took the comic book so literally. They missed the humor completely, and it's kind of fun and funny to watch simply because it's so utterly humorless. But Freddie was a great classic horror director. He directed a lot of the great Hammer films. And so having Freddie Francis direct an episode of Tales from the Crypt was poetic, I suppose.
You guys remember he came in lunch at day 4 saying, "I'm done." And we're like, wait, we're not ready to start the other episode yet. He finished it early. You remember? He finished it.
I forgot that completely.
He finished it at lunch on day 4. He finished it at lunch.
How did he do that? Do you remember? I mean,
he used to light he used to have this phrase, "I like the space, not the face."
And so everything, it was kind of that flat lighting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
to him,
and then so wherever the camera went, I mean, he didn't have to relight.
Yeah.
If you watch the whole season, you can tell which episodes Chris DP'd and which ones Robin DP'd without looking at the credits, because Chris's are very moody and nuanced, and Robin's are very flat, very, very British. And both of them work for the stories.
I remember Alan Hume. Wasn't he involved? I remember being on a scout with Freddie Francis and Alan Hume. Alan Hume shot all the Star Wars movies, the first 3. And I remember them having this great repartee because they're very famous Academy Award winning cinematographers. Alan Hume, it says here on the IMDb, shot 2 episodes in England of Tales from the Crypt with us.
Wow.
All right, so you did go on a recce with Freddie Francis and Alan Hume.
2 of the most famous British cinematographers of the last 50 years in the van. It was fantastic. It was a fantastic lunch and scout because Alan Hume was shooting Freddie Francis's episode, and they just were bickering about lighting and but it was all done in this great, fun English way of needling each other.
They did it super fast.
I wouldn't need it. I wouldn't need it for that. It's that kind of thing. But it was, the guy did 6 James Bond movies.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah.
Do you remember Joel's visit?
I was just talking about Joel's visit yesterday because a dear friend of mine just came back from London, and they stayed at the Dorchester. They were there for the film premiere of John Wick 4. And I said, Joel Silver came to visit us when we were in London, and he stayed at the Dorchester, and he had a Bentley that drove him around. And at the very end of it, after 10 days, he gave us the bill.
Of course he did. Of course he did.
And it was like, I don't know if you remember, it was like 6,000 pounds. I mean, it was a big freaking number.
Right.
In 96 or whatever it was.
I think you were in Los Angeles while he was in London, Gil.
That's why I don't remember it. That's good.
Oh yeah. Oh no, he came in like a.
I remember.
Yes, like a Tasmanian Devil. I mean, he came in and he had us get in that Bentley, and he was trying to get Michael Douglas to do a show for him. So he said, "I'll just have the Bentley for 2 days. I need to impress Michael Douglas." And 5 days later, the Bentley was still there. The company was calling us, and Joel said, "It's okay. It's okay. I'll be fine." And he had the suite at the Dorchester, and Karen was with him. And he rang up this massive bill. And I remember him just laying it down on the desk saying, "Yeah, you guys got to take care of this."
Luckily, I was in LA dealing with the movie, but at least I was with Bob Zemeckis.
Yeah.
At least.
And Glenn spent 2 days looking for grape Snapple for him. Because Joel was a grape Snapple guy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
where did Glenn finally find sufficient grape Snapple?
He found it on the east side of London at a train station store, like those little bodegas they have. And they asked him, "How many do you want?" He said, "All of them." He brought back a case.
He also commented that place knew what coffee beans were.
At least. Among the things that Joel threw when he came through London, he threw a party at Michael Kamen's house. And he invited Scott, and Scott invited me. And what I heard was a dinner at Michael Kamen's house with Joel. And I did not have the stomach for it. And so I begged off. And I said, I just don't, no, thanks anyway, Scott, but no.
Not feeling it.
And there were 3 other guests that night at dinner. Annie Lennox, Kate Bush, oh, and there was one other singer that, oh my God. Oh my God. So fucking stupid.
I would have flown back from England for that, from LA.
Yeah, I turned down dinner with Annie Lennox and Kate Bush at,
Hey, Greg,
at Michael Kamen's house.
Greg, I don't remember getting invited to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But Kamen, I will say, I will comment on Kamen. Kamen was like the nicest, most talented musician I've ever worked with. I think he was just such a sweet man and such a talented guy.
The other thing that was a great thing there were the plastering department was just a whole nother level of ability. As far as I remember, we had to make some tunnels for the Dover Castle set.
Yeah.
And we were putting it together, and this guy went in, and he was just a master, craftsman.
Mm-hmm.
I swear, like within an hour, I had these beautiful hand-done plaster tunnels that I was just like, if we were in LA, I'd be like, oh, we got to get a foam company. We got to, it'd be a lot bigger deal.
Yeah.
What was he making them out of?
He literally was just like taking like rags and, it was almost like a plaster of Paris sort of thing, and throwing plaster and shaping it, and just real stream of consciousness sort of artwork just going through it. And it just, within an hour or so, there was like a 20-foot tunnel. I remember thinking how remarkable that was. That was something that was really different. And also I thought that we had very, very good paint teams. I liked the way they were, the aging, and, we had a lot of fun with the sets. I only did the first 3, and but they were all 3 really different.
Building on what Greg said, once we got it straightened out, once we started shooting, I remember actually being pretty impressed with the crew, because you and Gil would sometimes leave early and leave me to close, and we didn't do a lot of late nights. There wasn't a lot of times where I had to call you and say, geez, we're going into our 13th hour, can we keep going? Do you want me to pull the plug?
Very efficient, super efficient.
These guys would finish in 8, 9, 10 hours, 11 hours at the most. I don't remember us doing a lot of overtime, a lot of late nights, a lot of Fridays, anything like that.
I do remember that as we went further into it, it got smoother. And in terms of just the production of it and finishing the work and getting the performances, it did level out a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. If anything, I think watching Bordello have more and more problems. At what point did they change our release date for Bordello? It was while we were in London, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
Yeah, it was. There was a bad feeling in our stomachs coming from Bordello because it just, I don't know, something just wasn't, it wasn't coming together the way that it should have. It was always fraught. And I think that also, well, I think Bordello colored a lot. How could it not? I wish the episodes themselves had been, I wish the writing had been better, and that was my department. So, mea
It's
culpa.
funny, when I think back of that whole period, it's almost 50-50 with the work and the off work stuff in London. Because to me, the big upside was actually being in London. I didn't know anybody. There was only 6 of us there from the States.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
I really took advantage of it. I mean, I remember my first 6 or 7 weekends on Saturday, I would literally get up, take the first bus that left in front of my flat, and would just take it to wherever it ended with my little A to Z guide. And then I would just jump on another bus, and just follow it, see. And I got to know the city pretty darn well. And I always say that working on a TV show, anytime you go into a city, you end up kind of learning the city more than even a lot of locals, because between all the tech scouts and all the location scouts, you hit so many different neighborhoods. Obviously, in a place like London, it's much bigger. But if I go to a place like Shreveport or Austin, Texas to work, you get to know the city so well. And I felt that way this time in London, not because of the work, but the time off I had and being in this great new city and really getting to explore. And so for me, as much as I enjoyed working on the show, the other half of it for me was just getting to be in London every weekend. I still remember a wonderful dinner that I had with Gil and Jeanette at a restaurant called Coast. And back then it was like the only decent restaurant.
Great.
What was it? What was the
That
name of
was
it?
a great restaurant.
Coast.
Yeah. Coast.
We went
Coast.
there. Yeah, that was a regular for you and Jeanette.
And was that near Green Park?
Yes. Yes. Near the near
Athenaeum?
yes.
Near the
Yes.
Athenaeum?
Yes, right around the corner from the Athenaeum.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super restaurant. Yeah, had
Is it
had
still
one
there?
or two
I
spectacular.
don't know. I don't know if it's still there, but it wasn't there. Sorry, it's not there because I wanted to take Michelle to it when we went last time, but it wasn't there.
Not surprising.
Yeah.
That's a tough business.
But there are some good
remember-
restaurants now in
Oh.
London. Do you remember that horrific Thanksgiving dinner we all went to?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
my God.
The worst ever.
Oy.
I stopped at Kentucky Fried Chicken on the way home because I was still hungry.
Where did we go for that?
It
We
was some place that offered an American Thanksgiving. You remember, it was expensive. It was like 80 pounds.
Yeah.
And they gave us
Yeah.
sliced shitty turkey with, I swear to God, the stuffing was made of cardboard.
And the potatoes were fake. They were from a powder, I think. And
I didn't remember. Yeah, that was
cranberry sauce. They had no idea what cranberry sauce was.
Yeah, exactly.
I just remember holding up my slice of turkey and I could see through it.
it was a deli slice.
And we were all so excited because they said American Thanksgiving dinner, and it was just horrific. And it was expensive. It was like 60, 70 pounds, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A lot of money.
and that's not a holiday there. It's not like you're going to take
No.
Thursday and go. That's like we did that after work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all the American suckers there.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things I remember sometimes even more than the work, is those things that we did, away from the
We had a Super Bowl party
Yes, we did.
at I think it was at
Yeah.
my flat.
Yes.
It was at your flat, and we
Yeah.
ordered in Indian food.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the Super Bowl, because of the time change,
In the middle of the night.
was in the middle of the night. So we
Yeah.
we got together, I think, at 10 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
all this Indian food. And by 2 o'clock in the morning, when the game started, everybody was fast asleep.
It wasn't quite the same.
And I remember vividly waking up thinking, "Oh my God, I better fake it so that." And as people came into the room and I was up, they would say, "Oh," and they had just gotten up. "How's the game?" And I would say, "Oh, it's great," and I had no idea what had happened.
I think the only one who stayed awake was Glenn.
Yeah,
Right.
well, yeah. Yeah, of course.
If you remember, he was into things. He didn't want to be British. He wanted to be American. He had no desire to be British, and he would say that openly and loudly in front of other Brits that would just piss him off.
I have fond memories of the weekend that Gil gave me his driver and car because he was going back to LA early.
Paul.
Oh,
We
Paul
have them
Graham.
for
Oh, I
Sunday,
love that
so
man.
He's
Paul.
yours. So I had a driver tooling me around London for the weekend.
And a Mercedes.
It was a Jaguar.
Oh, he used his Jag for you. Oh,
Yeah.
I only got the Mercedes.
Yeah, I got the Benz too.
Listen,
See, before
Paul,
you guys got
Paul-
there, I don't know if you guys remember this, but before you guys got there, I had Paul to myself for 2 weeks. Paul was my driver the first 2 weeks I was there, and he would take me wherever I wanted to go, and I loved him. And Jen and I ended up having dinner at his house. His wife was lovely, and I kept in touch with him till he passed away.
When did he die?
About 6 years ago.
Sorry to
Yeah,
hear.
about 6 years ago.
you know, after we shot, Jeannie's sister passed away, and we were going back to England, and we were figuring out like how we're going to get from here to here to here. And on the plane, we ran into Paul.
On the plane?
Yeah, he was coming back from LA and we told him, and he said, "Well, you know, I'll drive you around. What do you think you're going to do? I'm going to do it." And we said, "Really?" And he said, "Oh yeah." And so he took us to the funeral, and he took us back to the house and everything. And over the course, I think it was 3 days we were there. And at the end, he gave me a bill for £600, which I paid. But I was like, what?
Well, okay.
I didn't realize he had passed.
Yeah. But he was like I said, he was such a nice guy, and he treated me so well. And I have always said that if I ever had stupid money, the one thing I'd have is a driver, because that was freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I mean, I'd get up, I'd go downstairs to the Athenaeum. He'd be out there waiting for me. And there was one day where I was trying to get to Dover Castle, and I was going to take the train, and Paul drove me to the train station. Remember this? And by the London traffic was so bad that by the time I got to Pancras, or whatever the train station was,
St. Pancras,
it didn't make sense to go. And so I told Paul had dropped me off, and he'd gone back to the office. I took the train back to the studio, and I beat him by 40
You remember,
minutes.
Ed, we were planning to go to Amsterdam one weekend, and the Channel strike. It was a strike that went on for like 6 weeks.
Yes.
And there was no like easy.
Yes.
I kept thinking, well, we ought to just pop to Paris or something.
Yep.
But
Yeah. I did a couple of weekend trips. I remember I did one to, I had to leave to come back for my work permit. And you guys sent me to Morocco. Or I chose to go to Morocco because they said, you can go anywhere you want for a weekend, just have to come back through Heathrow to get your work permit.
Huh.
So I went to Morocco for the weekend. I went to Paris a different weekend.
Huh.
I went to Dublin for a weekend on EasyJet. I remember it was £9 each way.
oh my God.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
Between EasyJet and Ryanair, you could fly almost anywhere in Europe for £30. Couldn't take a bag. I mean, it was just my backpack, but I didn't care. I was just going there for a night.
It's nice getting per diem money. I know,
Especially in pounds.
Yeah. Hell took my wife Helen took all of my per diem money and banked it, and she had something in mind. And when we were finished with the show, we took a couple days in Paris, and using the per diem money alone, just the cash, we booked a suite at the Hotel de Crillon at the Place de la Concorde in Paris. One of the most, it was an incredibly expensive room. The first night we were there was some noise, and we complained, and they put us in an even better room for the
Wow.
rest of our stay. It was just, but stuff you could do with your per diem money and proximity to other places.
Well, I don't know if you guys remember, but Janet and I had just moved into the house on 65, and we were redoing it. And so I literally lived on my housing money and my per diem money, and I sent my paychecks. They just went home.
Yeah.
I mean, it all went home. I lived on the per diem and the travel and the housing money that we were given. And because I was in Ealing, I was spending a little less than you guys were on housing.
And everything else, I'm sure.
Plenty. It was, I mean, the partners or HBO or you guys were very good to us when it came to the travel money, and that helped considerably. I also loved my little flat. I mean, I'd never lived in an apartment before that, so that was interesting for me.
You had never lived in an apartment before?
No, I bought my first house at 19. I've always been in a house. I've always been in a house. That was my first time ever actually living in an apartment.
Hmm.
It was great. I mean, I loved it. I mean, I had a Domino's across the street that I would order so much for them. I would just raise my window up, call them on the phone, and they would see me talking to them. It was like, yeah, I want the cheese. You know, they'd be like, okay, 30 minutes. I'm like, yep. They'd call me when they were walking across the street. I'd meet them downstairs. But I'm a creature of habit. I do the same shit, you know. So I would eat at Nando's, you know, once or twice a week. I had my Domino's pizza. I had my little pub at the Ealing Common tube stop. You know, I did the same things, you know.
There was that
Well,
little French restaurant across the park from Ealing.
Say again?
A French restaurant that was across the park
Yes.
from Ealing. I remember eating there a lot with the art department.
I remember
Yeah.
being introduced to Scotch by Alan, single malt Scotch, while at the Athenaeum, because they have a great.
Oh,
They
yes.
used to have a single malt Scotch bar.
Goes
And I, who knew nothing about Scotch, my wife loves Scotch and single malt, but I knew nothing, and I didn't really want to know about it. But we would go into the bar, and Alan would order. He would say, "Taste this," and then taste this, and I'd go, "Yeah, why don't we go for some ice cream?"
We wrapped, and like you and Greg and Gil and Scott and Lisa were gone like 2 days later. You guys couldn't wait to get the hell out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was there for another 5 weeks, and I remember
Wow.
thinking, those motherfuckers.
Oh, I got out shortly before Christmas that year. Remember, I
Yeah.
always stayed for the first 3.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember that last month, I had not seen the sun.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
It was crazy. Like I was getting pretty depressed.
And the final verdict on our time in London?
It's still one of the best professional and personal experiences of my life. I mean, I just absolutely loved it, and I would do a show there again in a heartbeat if it was ever offered to me.
Yeah.
Hear, hear, Ed. Hear, hear. See you next time, everyone. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast, followed up for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific Crypt content.